Chandler Smith was disqualified at Rockingham, and it has huge championship implications. My name is Bozi Tatarevic, and I'm here with Dirty Mo Overdrive to get into the details of the disqualification and what that means for his season. Chandler Smith started at the rear of the race at Rockingham because they had to make an unapproved adjustment, which was the replacement of a broken shock. Because of that, he had a lot of work to do, but eventually by the end of the race, he made his way all the way up to fourth. That ended up earning him around 33 points, which placed him atop the Truck Series championship standings and put him in a good spot, but not for long. Unfortunately, after post-race technical inspection was completed, we found out that the number 38 truck of Chandler Smith failed rear heights. And what that means is that the truck was too low in the rear. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that, but the most likely scenario here, from my perspective, is that they just adjusted on the truck too much. So let's look at it from what happened in qualifying to what happened during the race and where they ended up. So during qualifying, we saw that the truck wasn't handling very well. It was bouncing on the track. There was something obviously wrong, and even the TV commentators mentioned it. Once they finished qualifying, the team found that there was a broken shock, so they told NASCAR, and the procedure there is if you change any parts after qualifying, you have to get your truck checked, and then you're going to send the truck back to the rear of the field. Once they replaced the shock, the team knew that they would be going through a lot of traffic. And in that scenario, if you know you're going to be starting from the rear, you want to set up your driver and your truck to be able to handle dirty air. So whatever setup they had in mind initially likely changed to an extent, and within the rules that NASCAR allows, they made some adjustments to the truck. And typically what you do there is you'll adjust the truck to be able to handle whatever conditions it's starting in, here starting at the rear, and then at the first pit stop, you'll make changes as the driver hopefully makes their way to the front. In this case, I believe that the rear height was legal when they started the race, and then once they got to the first pit stop, the crew members likely stuck a wrench in the rear and started adjusting rounds. And what that means is there are adjusters on the rear of the car where you can put a wrench in and turn them one way or the other. And what that basically does is whatever corner you're adjusting on, it can lower or raise that corner. So in this scenario, I think that the most likely thing that happened is that there was a lot going on between replacing the shock and how quickly it went from qualifying to the race. And the crew chief and the truck chief typically will make a note of where they start with a specific set of adjustments before the race. And then as they adjust during the pit stops, they'll want to make sure that they stay in the window. My belief is that because everything was so rushed, they may not have updated their notes from where they originally started to what the changes they made for starting from the rear. And they kept adjusting because they were chasing the balance and trying to listen to the driver and do things quickly. Now, what can happen is typically you'll have a window of, say, 6 rounds that you can go kind of in or out. And if you go past certain limits, you can set your truck to be too low or even too high, which is not typical, but depending on where you end up, you can kind of tweak things to be out of range. And it is the responsibility of the crew chief and the truck chief and whoever's making adjustments to keep track of this. Typically, the crew chief will keep track of this and the truck chief will be kind of a second person to check it. But a lot of times when things are frantic and hectic, you may miss these things by maybe just a round or two. And what that will mean is that you will be off and then you will be outside of the range and unfortunately fail technical inspection. There are some other kind of special scenarios depending on how trucks are set up. So a lot of times if you have, say, a progressive spring, which is a special type of spring that can be used with some spring rubbers in it, and say you spit out a spring rubber, that could also cause a truck to be lower than where it started. But that is extremely, extremely rare. And if that were to happen during the race, the driver would be screaming on the radio about it because the balance of the truck would shift significantly and very immediately if you were to lose something like that and have a spring that where losing a spring rubber would allow it to drop down that low. There are other scenarios with how Trucks are adjusted pre-race in order to pass technical inspection to how they get adjusted in race, and that kind of goes along with our first point. So depending on stuff like sway bar load or what kind of spring you're using in the front, like there's some certain pigtail springs that you can use where in order to pass heights in the front in pre-race inspection, you'll have to crank on one of the corners in the rear to basically compensate for and keep the truck up, and then take those rounds out on the first pit stop. That could also result in a miscalculation where you're basically trying to keep this balance of this like huge teeter-totter is kind of the deal where you try to keep all of these four corners balanced for optimal handling, but also to keep all four corners within the requirements for inspection height. So there are multiple opportunities and a lot of stuff to be tracked during a race in order to be able to make sure that you're staying within these requirements. Now, many people will ask, well, what is the inspection process like? What is NASCAR doing to make sure all of this, stays consistent? And NASCAR actually does a lot in order to make sure that all of these things are measured consistently. So NASCAR has a height gauge, which is basically a gauge that sits and rises or goes down with the truck that's set on the truck. And that height gauge is pretty straightforward. You have a green zone, a yellow zone, and a red zone. So for pre-race tech, you have to be in the green zone, so that means that a certain minimum height has to be in that range. And for post-race tech, you just have to not be in the red zone. So they actually give teams a little bit of leeway where they can go a little bit lower in that green and into the yellow and still pass tech. But if you change your ride height significantly enough and go past both the green and the yellow zone, you'll be in the red. And teams will again ask, how are those height sticks calibrated? Well, NASCAR actually has a very specific procedure in the rule book where they have these calibration rods, and they not only check that at the start of the weekend, but they actually check it typically multiple times per weekend and typically before every run through the inspection stations for the trucks or for cars in the other series. There are a lot of reasons why a truck can fail rear heights, but in this scenario, I think it's typically the simplest explanation that they just got out of hand with their adjustments because they had so much stuff happen in such a short time. There are other scenarios too, depending on the track or the setup of the car where you could see damage, but that typically happens in situations where you have trucks, say, going through green flag pit stops and they bottom out and maybe damage the splitter, so now they're trying to compensate on the other end. But here, just going back through the race, I didn't really see anything specific for that 38 truck that would say, hey, I see where they had some damage and had to compensate for it, or hey, here's something very specific that happened. So I realistically believe that the reason that the 38 truck of Chandler Smith failed technical inspection and got disqualified is that they just got out of range with their adjustments because they had to make so many as they moved from the back to the front in the race.